What's up, you guys? I want to answer some questions people have been having recently about how to go about scaling a bread route business and buying multiple bread routes. And so in my other videos, I talk about owning multiple routes being a pretty exceptional sort of thing, but it does happen. It's just exceptional. When you understand more about the companies and this business model itself and the contractors, you will understand why it's exceptional, and I will also explain how you can do it too. And so remember, when I'm talking about bread routes, I'm talking about one of the 5 major brand labels that allow people to buy and sell that contract across America. Remember, it's always going to be Flowers, Bimbo, Pepperidge Farm, Snyder's Lance, or Mission Tortilla. It's typically one of those 5. And so the point is that when you are buying a contractually based business, you're not getting a true independent business. You have to adhere to whatever is in that contract. And a lot of times those contracts want the owner to be running those routes themselves. Now, they don't always have to run it every single day. Yes, you can have people hired out to help you out or allow you to take some time off or whatever, but those contracts start to very specifically state that they want to see you, the owner, running those routes. Just like if you had a job, they want to see you showing up. They don't want to see someone that you're paying half the wage to show up and do the work. They're going to say, hey, we hired you. Who's this other guy? They're not going to allow it. Just like a bread route company is not going to allow it or like it either, typically. Now, at this point, a lot of people are going to say, well, that basically just sounds like a job. I don't want a job. This is no good. This isn't a real business. Well, that's not quite right either. It's in between. It's not a job and it's not an independent business. It's a contractually based business. And in this gray area causes a lot of lawsuits because the contractors that get pissed off for reasons valid or not will sue these companies. But the courts say, no, you're basically a contractor, nice try, and they shoot these lawsuits down, and then another one will pop up at a different firm, at a different company. Happens over and over. We've seen this for years and years. They are consistently classified as contractors in this particular model. But I understand the gray area, and I understand the frustration with some people that do want to sue these companies, but the courts continue to affirm we are contractors. And so the question is, why do these companies not want us to own multiple routes? Well, there's a few different reasons that are going to be more or less applicable in each of these situations. One is that the people that are going to want to buy multiple routes are typically going to be large acquirers of businesses, private equity groups, things like this. And what they want to do, they want to buy all these things, hire out some drivers, and then kick back, drink margaritas, and cash checks. The problem is when those drivers get hurt, get sick, need to move, whatever the reason may be that they don't show up, their impact is tremendous. It's not like if they were working at a software development company, when someone calls in sick, well, maybe something just takes a little bit longer to get released. Or if they're at a car wash and there's 10 other people that are working there at that particular facility, when one person's gone, well, maybe the customer wait line's a little bit longer. When one person is gone in the bread route world, nobody gets their bread for that day. That's a kind of a big problem. And so the impact of having an absent driver is very, very noticeable. And so what happens is a lot of times the service levels can dwindle because someone that's making $600 or $700 a week running a bread route has a lot less motivation to show up versus the contractor that has put his life savings on the line to be able to buy this business. So whenever both of those people wake up and their back's kind of sore, maybe the driver wants to just skip that day. The owner is like, I got to do this. So the service levels a lot of times are better for those companies whenever they've got the contractor themselves actually going out and running those things. So the other thing that can happen is pretend someone could own 100 bread routes. Whenever the bread route company says, hey, you know what, we want to pay you 1% less in the next contract that's coming up, that bread route contractor that's got 100 of them will say, hey, you pay me 1% less, I'm not going anywhere. How about I just not deliver your product to 100 different stores? They're going to say, oh my God, we've got to be able to pay this. Otherwise, this guy's going to destroy our brand because we can't get our stuff distributed out there. It's going to go to a competitor to fill up that shelf space. We got to do whatever this guy wants. So whenever contractors get really big, they can start to boss the major company around as opposed to the other way around, which is the way that they want it. So having a lot of routes starts to give contractors a lot of control versus the other way where there's not really a whole lot of control from a single route owner. Now, I don't think that bread route companies are actually going to decrease the percentage of commission by 1% next year or whatever it may be. I don't think that for the most part, the companies even abuse their power, but they don't want a contractor getting so big to where the contractor can decide to abuse their power. So right now, we've got a lot of historical precedents that shows that these bread route companies, for the most part, don't really abuse that power and things are fine. But looking at the next thing is the non-compete. So for example, Bimbo may say, hey, we don't want you to own a flowers route because a lot of their products compete with ours. Maybe you decide to push the flowers route because they get a better commission and you start to neglect our product. Maybe you don't make our displays look as nice or the shelves look messier. We don't know what you're going to do. We'd rather you just not compete, and we don't want to find out that you're owning multiple bread routes of different brands. And so that might be another thing. And so remember also, you have to interview for every one of these routes that you get. So it's not like you can just take it over because you've got the money and the seller wants to sell it to you. You still have to interview, and not everybody gets approved. Now, the majority of people do get approved, but in that interview process, that terminal manager is trying to assure that that brand will be secured. They will have a contractor that can deliver that product successfully and consistently. And a lot of times, whenever the owner is saying that they're going to do it themselves, that's probably one of the biggest guarantees that they can have in terms of making sure that their product is distributed on time versus someone that is absentee, which they inherently would be if they had multiple routes and they were just hiring out drivers and whatnot. And so one of the next reasons why contractors do not even want to scale is that it does not financially make sense. If you consider that the average bread route generates a net income of $70,000 a year, well, if you pay a driver $50K a year, you're only left with 20. And so that's after taking on the risk, the responsibilities, the phone calls of dealing with the breakdowns and the guy calling in sick and all this. People say, well, it's not even worth it to just generate 20K a year. The next thing that people will think is, well, I'll just get 5 routes and then it will make sense. First off, getting 5 routes is going to be really exceptional. Yes, you can get multiple routes, and I'll discuss more of that in a moment, but getting 5 is like pretty crazy. Secondly, when you get 5, you probably now need a manager in place. So you pay the manager $60K, now you're only left with 40. So a lot of times it just really kind of doesn't make sense to be able to try to scale this business in a lot of situations. Now granted, not all the situations, but if you're dealing with routes that are generating, let's say $70K a year, it's not going to make sense financially, and people will just naturally want to avoid doing this. And so the final reason why a lot of contractors may end up avoiding this is not really because of their own choice. So let's say the money did support it. Maybe they didn't mind managing a team. Even if that was the case, a lot of times to be able to get multiple routes, you might have to have a year, 2, 3 years of experience to be able to get on the good side of that terminal manager to where he will even allow you to be able to buy additional routes. So everything may line up perfectly, but it may take a lot longer than what a lot of people are expecting or willing to put in to be able to get that. So at this point, you understand why the companies don't typically like to see multiple route ownership, and you understand why most of the contractors will not go down this path either. But again, there are exceptions. And so you may have the best team in the world that you can bring on. You may have the most profitable routes that are all bundled up together, and you may say, hey, I want to move forward. So there's 2 ways people go about getting those multiple routes. One way I do not recommend, but I want to explain it to you so whenever you see people own multiple routes, you understand it. What they're doing is they are violating the contract. They are setting up multiple corporations. They have different frontmen that seem like they're the owner of the corporation that go in and do the interviews and whatnot, and they are secretly owning multiple routes, but they're trying to make sure that these companies don't know. Don't do this, because when those companies find out, it will be considered breach. You will get terminated. You will lose everything. Don't do it. But the point is, you will see people trying to do this, and they will start to realize, oh my God, I've got a shitload of risk here. Maybe I should sell this business. And they'll say, look at me, I own these multiple routes. You could just buy it too. And then you get in there and realize what you're in. Now you've immediately got to try to sell this thing too before you get found out and terminated and so on. The other thing that's kind of an interesting thing to think about is that if you are hiring a driver and you want them to be the front man to interview for another route, are you really owning multiple routes, or are you really just giving that driver a loan to run the route for you. And so you may say, hey, maybe that's what I actually need to do. I need to be a private lender and lend out money for people that want to own and operate these things themselves. So maybe just a little bit of food for thought there. The second way that you can go about doing it is you contract with one of the two majors, which allow multiple route ownership far easier than any of the others. Those two are Mission Tortilla or Flowers. And in the bread route world, every state can be a little bit different. So for example, in Massachusetts, you actually have to own multiple Flowers routes if you're going to buy that particular business. So there, multiple routes are a given. Now, how many can you get to? Well, there's going to be a cap of some sort, and I'm sure it's going to be a little bit of a gray area in terms of how big Flowers will allow their contractors to get. But the reality is that sometimes it may be possible. The other thing is that the contracts can change. So at a point in time in the past, you could own one route in Massachusetts, and then they said, oh, we've changed our mind. We want you to own three. This happened in FedEx too, scared out a lot of single route owners or people that didn't want to manage teams. And now we have everyone managing teams in the FedEx world. That's starting to happen in Flowers, and you can see that starting to happen in the Mission world, even though it's not been mandated yet that you have to own multiple routes. So there may be a lot of opportunity with those particular companies. But hopefully this starts to explain why so many companies do not allow multiple route ownership, why the contractors themselves don't typically own multiple routes. And if you want to find out about what a bread route owner actually does on a day-to-day basis, check this video out here. And as always, like, subscribe. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.